we left off.
We left off right after the fifth party system.
Okay, so we're on to this. Okay, so we finished the fifth party system. Okay, so the post-party system era. We consider this the era of 1968 to the present. However, there has been discussion that we are now in a new era of political parties that is very partisan. This is the idea of red states and blue states, that we have really sort of determined where districts and states will be going as far as their party affiliation. Part of that's because of gerrymandering, part of that's just because of the partisan politics that we participate in now. And so that's sort of where we are, that we can sort of call a state red or call a state blue because of their, traditional leanings. And we've seen a lot of partisan trends, especially in the 2012 and 2014 elections. Things like people voting party line, basically going to a ballot and checking every single person on the ballot that is a part of one party. That's happening more and more often than it used to. And again, there are some good things and bad things that associate themselves with that. We're starting to see partisan trends in different groups of people as well. We can look at a specific demographic and get a good sense of where they'll be voting or how they'll be voting in certain elections. So this is just a visual representation of the last election, presidential election in 2012. Remember that the number underneath the state is the number of electoral votes for the state. Electoral votes are the number of representatives you have in the House of Representatives plus the Senate. So for Wisconsin, we have 10 electoral votes because we have 8 representatives and 2 senators. So what you can see is through the Electoral College system, you need to have a majority of the votes, and so you don't have to win the majority of the states. If I look really quickly at this, part of me thinks, okay, well, Mitt Romney would win that because there's a lot of red. But unfortunately, Mitt Romney only won states that had very little electoral votes, and so he wasn't able to get to the number that he needed to win the presidency. Winning states like California and Florida, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, those are really important states because they hold a lot of electoral votes. Mitt Romney won Texas, which is a really big bump for him, but winning like states like North Dakota only have 3 electoral votes. That's going to be much harder to do. But when we talk about red states, blue states, this is what we mean. Because of the Electoral College, it's the winner-take-all system. So obviously there were a great deal of Wisconsinites who voted for Mitt Romney, but because the majority of our state voted for Barack Obama, our whole state, all 10 of our electors, went to Barack Obama. Okay, so let's talk about who belongs to each political party. Obviously, these are going to be generalities. We know that there are some exceptions. There are quite a few exceptions. But in general, in the Republican Party, we see men who are older and wealthy. And when we're talking about race, we're really talking about white here. Not a lot of minorities in the Republican Party. They're working on that, trying to gain some more demographic changes. In the Democratic Party, we see a lot of women, young people, members of labor unions, and non-whites. Okay, differences in political parties and their priorities. I wish that your book would have talked a little bit more about the similarities of political parties, because I think that's the thing you don't hear about very often, and it's very hard to find in today's media. But some differences in political parties. Democrats tend to favor education. They also tend to favor government programs that help those in poverty, homelessness, and those who need health care. So essentially, the Democratic platform is the idea that government should get involved in people's lives in order to help them out of situations that may be beyond their control, or just they may need help. The Republican Party is going to have a couple of other priorities. Republicans tend to prioritize terrorism and the military, defense, national security. Those are some of the main focuses in the Republican Party. And in general, their platform is the idea that government should get involved in your everyday life, that it's your responsibility as a citizen of this country to try and get a life for yourself, get a job, get out of addiction, make sure that you can pay your bills. And if government needs to step in, they should only be stepping in temporarily, that there shouldn't be this long-term aid to people who continually need it. So because I'm me, and I feel like you need to know this, there are some similarities with the political parties. And I think you need to understand that. Both parties believe that things dealing with veterans, military families, spousal support, those are really important. So both Democrat and Republican members are going to agree that we need to make sure that government works well for the people who sacrificed for us and for our freedoms. They also believe in education. Of this country, the way that they differ is how they think that education should be given to you, whether it should be public or private or charter or things like that. But in general, they believe that education is really important. And then they also believe that the United States should continue to be a world power, that we should continue to stay powerful and on top of technology changes and new ideas and innovations, that the United States can't sit back on their heels and sort of, be complacent or, just be okay with what's going on. That you have to keep challenging yourself. You have to keep trying to stay a world power and be bigger and better in many ways. And again, they differ in how to do that, but in general, both parties agree in that area. Okay, in 2012, the book's really going to talk about the 2012 election, because it would obviously be the last presidential election that they looked at before publishing this book. In the 2012 election, we see a lot of issues of the economy. The economy is, across the board, Republicans, Democrats, the biggest issue in the 2012 election. It is the thing that the voting public wants to understand what's going to happen. They want some solutions when it comes to the 2012 election. We also see social issues, reproductive rights, healthcare, and abortion issues are some of the biggest issues in this election. International threats and then immigration are really big pieces of this, the previous election. So this is a graph that your book gives. It's fascinating. This is basically the priority issues by partisan areas. So things that the Republican Party believes is important and things that the Democratic Party. So you're gonna see things like the economy all the way over to the left. They both tend to agree on. It's pretty important. Healthcare policy, they both agree that it's a pretty important thing. However, they really differ in why it should be important. Democrats tend to believe that it should be important because we should make sure that things are added, and Republicans think that it should be important because we need to get things out of the government entities. Terrorism, but then you'll see things that Republicans tend to believe are really big priority issues and Democrats don't, or vice versa. So Republicans tend to think immigration, world affairs, very big priorities. Democrats tend to look at things like the environment, gun policies, things like that are their most important issues. So it really does change depending on the party. So why has the two-party system endured? Your book divides this into 4 subgroups, or 4 reasons as to why the two-party system has continued to live on in our political system. First is that we have very strong historical foundations in the two-party system. Basically, since the Constitution was ratified, we've been in a two-party system. And our country tends to be very foundational in our history. We don't try a lot of new things when things have been pretty entrenched into our history. And so there's just that sense that we've just always had two parties. Second is what we call political socialization and practical considerations. A piece here is your political socialization. You've grown up in a world where you've really only heard about the two political parties. You learned that your parents were this, or your parents were that, or your family is this, or your president is this party. You weren't sat down when you were 13 and someone told you about third parties. If you were, that would be a fantastic parenting experience. I plan to do that with my children. No, I'm not going to do that. That'll be weird. But it is important to sort of understand that you've grown up in a world that really only focuses on two parties. So why would you think about a third party? It's not something that you grew up with. It's not something that you were socialized in. The other two reasons why we have a two-party system pretty entrenched into our government is the electoral system. And so this idea that in the Electoral College, you need to have a majority of electoral votes. When you split it among three candidates, things get really tense. Because the Electoral College, it's going to be really hard to get that majority of votes if you have to run against two other people in these states. It wasn't that the founders chose the Electoral College to, spark a two-party system, but in essence, the only way the Electoral College really works is if there are only two parties vying for those Electoral College votes. So this is why Democrats and Republicans are very nervous about third parties. If Donald Trump or Ben Carson decide to split from their party and form a third party, things are going to get really tense. Not only because in the campaign now I'm not campaigning against one person, I'm campaigning against two other people. Also because the Electoral College, making all that math work is going to be really difficult. Because now I've got to, try and find all of those votes and make sure that states go to me and not to the two other people. And then lastly, we have a lot of state and federal laws that favor a two-party system. So we see a lot of things that just kind of continue the habit. Part of it is that the FEC limits what you can contribute to a political candidate. Remember that they don't limit what you can contribute to an interest group, but they do limit what you can contribute to a candidate. And for big parties, that's fine because they have many, many donors. But for a third party or a smaller party, that can actually be very debilitating because they don't have all of these donors. They maybe only have a few. And if they're limited to what they can give, that means that they're going to get less money, which means that their campaigns aren't going to be as large. And so we see a lot of things in our governmental system that prohibit third parties from really being, a strong force in a candidate, in a, election run. Proportional representation, your book's going to talk a little bit about this. Essentially, it's the idea, it's an alternative to the Electoral College system. Canada and Britain have it. Basically, like if you're in your district or in your nation, Party X obtains a certain percentage of the vote, and Party Y gets this percentage of the vote, and Party Z gets this percentage of the vote. In the legislative branch or in the representative body, that's the same. So then, Party Y or X gets 12% of the representation in the body, and X gets, what I'm saying? So it's a proportional representation. It allows that you don't have to win everything. You just win as much as you can, and then that representation goes into the legislative branch. Okay, let's talk about the role of minor parties in U.S. politics. First, we have what we call ideological third parties. These are the idea of splitting and forming a new party on a specific issue, typically. We see third parties that have developed it for a number of things. Two examples that I'll give you is the Libertarian Party. They believe in this capitalist economy, this hands-off policy and regulating things. And that's an ideological piece that they've decided neither one of the parties really fits with them. And so they've split off to form a third party, the the Libertarian Party. We also have what we call the Green Party. The Green Party's main foundation is the idea of environmental activism. And because both parties weren't really doing much to attract those people, they split off and formed their own third party. So we see that happen. The other thing we see is splinter parties. These come from original parties, and they tend to sort of associate still with the original party. This would be something like the Tea Party. The Tea Party started to splinter off of the Republican Party a number of years ago, and they continue to stay active, but in general, they favor a Republican or conservative ideology. So they're sort of a splinter party. They're kind of an arm of the Republican Party. Impact of the minor parties. Minor parties, third parties are really good for getting issues talked about. They cause candidates to have to talk about something. Because if I'm in a third party and I get some press and I talk about an issue that the candidates don't often talk about, the candidate is usually going to have to respond or say something. And so it causes some more discussion. It causes some issues to be brought up. It can also affect the outcome of an election, obviously. Rather than just voting for 2 people, you're voting for 3 people, and sometimes that can really change the way that parties try and gain popular support. Okay. These are 2 good examples of third-party candidates. Ralph Nader ran 3 times as the Green Party candidate and twice as an independent. He is very involved in third-party politics and interest groups and things like that. And then Ross Perot ran as a third-party candidate for president in 1992 and 1996. Okay. We need to talk about 2 terms that you probably haven't heard in regards to political science, and it's the idea of realignment and de-alignment, okay? So realignment, this is a process when a substantial group of people, or voters, switches party allegiance. I'll say it again. It's a process in which a substantial group of voters switches party allegiance. This produces a long-term change in the political landscape. This will happen for many reasons. We're going to talk about that, and we'll sort of talk about if it's still possible. So the first piece here is a myth of dominance. We often see realignment when a newly dominant party replaces a previously dominant party. It's sort of this myth, this idea that the dominant party is where you want to be. And some people do move because they believe that, you know, being in a dominant party is good. It happens, but it's not really like, you know, reliable as far as, you know, understanding people's movements and things like that. We know that it happens, we just don't really know why it happens or how it happens. And then the other myth here is the myth of predictability. Political scientists have sort of decided that we typically, as a society, realign every 36 years. Now, obviously, that's just sort of a prediction. It's not really factual, but we have seen that every 30, 40 years, the parties tend to change significantly, and so do their followings, so do their constituents. Is realignment still possible? Your book sort of talks about this question, and they say that for realignment to occur, a substantial body of citizens must come to believe that their party can no longer represent their interests or values. Now, your book has a statement that's really interesting. It says, given the increasing cohesion of the parties today, it's unlikely that realignment is going to happen. I think your book is already outdating itself. I think in the last few months, we have seen parties in this presidential election not attract a certain amount of people or sort of put people off. And I do think that we could see realignment happen. I think we are seeing realignment happen. I think we're seeing at the beginning of this election cycle, this candidacy, I think there were a lot of people who were pretty set on where they were going to go. And I think because of some of the recent events, I wouldn't be surprised to see some realignment happen in political party tendencies. Okay, next thing is what we call de-alignment. De-alignment is not really switching parties, it's sort of pulling yourself out of a party affiliation. It's sort of going back from being partisan to independent. And this would happen when it's when party loyalties start to decline. When people are a little less apt to say, I am a Republican or I am a Democrat. That's what we call de-alignment. Now, your book does talk about this, independent voters and not so independent voters. It's important to understand this. When we've been polling people in the last few years, we've seen that independent voters are actually rising. The number of reported independents is rising. However, we actually think they're not so independent voters. What's starting to happen is people are saying that they're independent, but in general, they tend to lean one way and they're pretty set in that way. And so it's really hard to get a sense of de-alignment because I could say that I'm an independent voter, but if I vote the same way, and if I had to vote today and I could easily decide who I was going to vote for, I'm not so independent. We also consider swing voters part of de-alignment. Voters who tend to swing from one party to the other tend to be a part of the de-alignment process. Tipping is also a piece of de-alignment. This is a phenomenon that occurs when a group that has been becoming more numerous grows large enough to change the political balance. So I'll say that again. Tipping is a phenomenon that occurs when a group of people that's becoming more numerous over time grows enough to change the political balance. So we have seen tipping in Massachusetts and tipping in California. This is typically when we feel like a state has been typically going to a specific political party and they start to change. Now this can happen for a number of reasons, and political scientists spend their entire careers trying to study tipping and how tipping, can be encouraged or, prevented. What we tend to see in tipping is things like demographic changes. So when young people tend to move to a specific area and old people tend to move out, or old people tend to move into a specific area and young people tend to move out, that's where we'll see tipping. We also see tipping in political culture. So if one area has had a political leader in a party and hasn't done very well, we'll often see some tipping. We'll see them go the other way because they don't like the leader that they have in the party that they have. Things like age, in areas that are predominantly older, old people are going to die, young people are going to move in, we'll see some changes in that. And then political parties of the future. This is really interesting to me. So what are the political parties really doing right now? What are their, new goals or their upcoming goals? For the Democratic Party, it's sort of this idea of maintaining a tolerant spirit to continue to attract to younger voters, Latinos, and women. That's going to be their major goal in the next few years, is to continue to be the party that's open, that's accepting, that tries to incorporate lots of different races and ethnicities and things like that. As far as the Republican Party has started to recognize that their current demographic changes or trends aren't going to work in their favor. So what we're really talking about here is that typically Republican parties are made up of older citizens, and we have what we call the baby boom. So right now, our older population is very big, but they're going to start to die. And when they do, we're going to see these young people who are typically Democratic, so they're going to stay Democratic. So the Republican Party has sort of seen the writing on the wall here in the sense that their demographic is old, and there's going to be less old people in the next few generations, And so they need to figure out a way to attract to the younger voters. So this is their priority in the next few years. Trying to work on women, Latinos, young people, trying to make the Republican Party look more applicable to your life as a young person, as opposed to like only focusing on the things that their older constituents would like. And then your book has this phrase that I wrote down and I highlighted because I think it's very important to understand. Your book says there's another possibility. If the two parties continue their bitter rivalry on the campaign trail and gridlock persists in Congress, such that the nation's most pressing problems go unaddressed, moderates and those who are weakly attached to a party may become true independents, deciding each election on issues of concern to them and avoiding identification with a party altogether. And that is something that we have started to see, that independents are becoming more and more independent, and that we might start to see in your generation elections decided on issues as opposed to candidates. We might see that there's less, straight ticket voting where you're going to vote for the candidate that you think has done the best at, attacking the issues as opposed to just the name of the party that's after them, which is good. That's a good thing in a way. It may prevent some of this continued gridlock that has happened.